When you think of power, you probably think about somebody or some group overpowering another person or another group. Well, in this episode of Power and Presence, I'm going to introduce you to two kinds of softer power. And I think you'll find them very relevant to some important things in the world happening right now and also in your world. So stick around. In recent years, the idea of soft power has been popularized by political scientist Joseph Nye. His reflections on power have caught on with many governments and institutions across the world, including in China, where I live. Nye argues that in any given conflict, using coercion and force may not be the best way to gain control of the situation. In the first Gulf War in 1990 to 1991, for example, the US was quickly able to seize control of Iraq. The vastly superior military capacity, especially air power, meant that the immediate challenge from Iraqi resistance fighters was short-lived. If that same aggression by US forces meant that the American and coalition forces did not win the hearts and minds of many Iraqis, the coalition became snared in its own trap, caught in a long and very expensive war. Nye points out that military forces can often make better long-term gains not by violence and threats against an opponent, but by offering them protection and assistance. It is often true that force is a poor means to achieve power over another or over a situation. Trying to defeat or annihilate an opponent may actually make a situation far worse. The mere act of framing a situation as allies versus enemies can be self-fulfilling. One argument I make in my book, Power and Presence, is that the various expressions of tribalism we see proliferating on today's internet are being driven in part by aggressive media platforms and social media creators. How many captions read something like, AOC destroys Trump press secretary, Ben Shapiro destroys woke student, or something like that. The problem is that the intention to silence and destroy the other inevitably creates resistance from that enemy. And trust breaks down, engagement is lost, and the result is often a far more vitriolic and extended drama than might otherwise have been the case. No doubt, you may be thinking about how this applies to the current situation in the Middle East, the Israel-Palestine war. But I shall leave that up to you to contemplate, other than to say it's something that could be applied to both sides. Now, there are other forms of power which are even softer than that proposed by Joseph Nye. So this brings me to the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese book of wisdom, written some 2,600 years ago by Chinese mystic Lao Tzu, and it espouses a subtle form of indirect influence that we can have on the world, made possible by following the way of the Tao. Lao Tzu renders a universe resplendent with oceans, rivers, and streams, where we humans can navigate our way by learning to read well the hidden cosmic currents about us. In intuiting the Tao that aligns with such universal eddies, we can then move more fluidly through the world. In the process of letting go, we may open up to a kind of wisdom and intelligence which allows us to enter a state of flow with the world. Perhaps my favorite passage of that great and ancient tome comes from chapter 66, which reads as follows, and I'll do my best with this. The river and the sea can be kings of 100 valleys, because they lie below them. That is why they can be kings of 100 valleys. Therefore, if the sage wants to stand above people, he must speak to them from below. If he wants to lead people, he must follow them from behind. Therefore, when the sage stands above people, they are not oppressed. When he leads people, they are not obstructed. The world will exalt him and not grow tired of him, because he does not resist. None in the world resists him. And you can forgive Lao Tzu for his slight sexism. Well, he did live 2,600 years ago, and he wasn't very woke. Okay, I maintain that you can align with a power which is consistent with the idea of the Tao. Embodied presence, being still in the present moment and allowing it to speak to you, permits a deeper self-mastery and helps facilitate deep intuition, what I call integrated intelligence, which you can check out in this video. And all that helps you to align your life choices with your authentic self. This mastery is not necessarily incompatible With more traditional forms of power, however, those times when we are called upon to assert some form of control in the world, in society, and in our relationships. Indeed, integrated intelligence invites a healthier expression of such external power. Let me be clear though, you can't wield the power of the Tao. When we seek too much control over others and life's circumstances, we tend to become neurotic and overbearing. Like a man trying to grasp water in his tight fist, we are likely to find that what is most important falls from our grasp. The act of surrender, paradoxically, can be one of the most empowering choices. It can free us from fighting what simply is. We must therefore learn how to be in the world, to say yes to what God, or the universe, if you prefer, has given us. Embodied presence requires a deep relationship with the body and with the present moment. It is this conscious relationship with ourselves which grants us subtle yet powerful knowings and integrated intelligence. We all need to move through phases of the assertive, the masculine, and the receptive, the feminine, the yin and the yang, as the Chinese call it. But we must not lose the capacity to return to presence, to the receptive, to the feminine. When the gates of heaven are open, can you play the role of the woman? Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching. And yet, this does not mean that we need to abandon the masculine. Sometimes in life, we are called upon to stand in our power, to set boundaries against an opposing force. This world and its people are not always kind, and the bear may not be so far from the cave entrance. Sometimes Mother Nature can be a fickle mistress, but that is a topic for another video. So please subscribe and like to receive those videos. See you again in the futures.